in immunology and neuroscience for about 10 to 15 years. And I can tell you right now, I had plenty of mentors, and I still have one now. So I'm very excited to share some of my thoughts around this developing effective mentoring relationships. So I'll pass it along.
Okay. Hi. Welcome, everyone. My name is Yadilette Rivera-Colón. I am an assistant professor of biology at Biophysical University in Longmeadow, Massachusetts. And I basically am a brand new professor, so I still have tons of mentors. And I'm happy to share my thoughts with you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jody Puglisi, reporting here from my kitchen. I'm a professor of structural biology at Stanford University. I've been a professor for the last, 26 years. I was chair of my department for 10 years. I've been a member of council of Biophysical Society. So I have a lot of experience in both being mentored and mentoring at all stages of careers. And I also teach a course here on starting up your laboratory as an assistant professor, which is quite popular. So looking forward to our discussion today.
Fantastic. So just some housekeeping things. I think the audience here is well aware that we have an opportunity for you guys to dialogue with us through this media. And I think there will be an opportunity for text to provide some text questions or comments along the way. And so we'll be moderating those, and we hope to see a lot of them. But to kick things off, we wanted to start with Jody, in fact, just to talk about, as a part of the Biophysics Society, what was her role in terms of, or her experience in terms of getting involved with a mentor? How does it start?
Yeah. So for me, part of me being in science and being able to do the stuff that I do is because I had multiple mentors throughout the Biophysical Society. So I was, the first time I ever heard about biophysics was through the Biophysics summer course. And that was the first time. Then after that research experience, I was able to then go to the Biophysical Society meeting. And as an undergrad in this big meeting, it was very scary to be able to find people or talk to people. But having been as part of the Biophysics summer course, there were already familiar faces to me. So there were people like Dr. Barry Lenz, who was the director at the time, and Rob Kantman, who's still working with the society, and she's always helping us out. And just having those familiar faces helped me get other mentors throughout the society, which I still have today. But the most important part is being able to find what you want to do, and then identify who are the people who have gone through the same path that you are trying to go to, and then get a little outside of your comfort zone to be able to approach those people. And if you can't approach them directly, approach someone who knows them that you're more comfortable with, and then that way you can gain a new mentor. At least that's the way that worked for me. I don't know about you guys.
And Jody, one question I had when I was obviously a young mentee was, I love science. I'm here and I'm doing these things in the lab. And then when you throw out these big terms of biophysics, for example, as an undergraduate, what do I do? And how do I then hone in on a particular mentors around that broad term?
So basically,
I'll let Jody.
Go ahead.
We have too many Jodys.
Jody and Jody is just confusing. Sorry.
When I was studying as an undergraduate, biophysics as a field was very narrow. So I was trained as a chemist. And I think what you'd find is a lot of people who call themselves biophysicists don't train as an undergraduate as a biophysicist. They're trained as chemists, physicists, engineers, chemical engineers, you name it, biologists. And so, I think we all come to this discipline through various tributaries. And really, as an undergraduate, I think the most important thing are your professors. I think those are the people who can give you guidance because it's all very daunting. I mean, I'm still confused about what direction I'm going in my career, and certainly when I was 22, I just knew I was interested in applying physical principles to biological molecules and vaguely interested in nucleic acids. And I got some advice from my professors about places and programs and possible graduate mentors that might fit me. And then you go off and you explore. So I think using the resources that are around you, at whatever institution you're at, there are fantastic people who have a broader view of the universe than you do. I think that's the first step in this journey.
Right. Did you, Jody, did you want to piggyback on that?
Yeah, sure. So it is so true. There are so many resources within your university that sometimes people don't ask. And especially for those professors that do something extra, those professors that get you excited about something, those are usually the right kind of people to talk to, and being able to ask them what would they think would be the next step. And even if they don't know immediately, they'll be able to guide you and find somebody who does.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to back up a bit, because I want to talk about my my experience, or my first experience in terms of trying to seek that first mentor, actually really as a graduate student, if you will, was really coming up with the language or the how-to approach a given, when in some thoughts it's like a professor, right? When you're knocking on the professor's door, or when you're looking up the research, you find it, or I found it so fascinating in terms of the area of my interest. But my next step was, how do I go forward in terms of making that initial contact? And I think that's very important in terms of understanding that all mentors, like ourselves, were once in your shoes as a mentee, whether it was an undergraduate student or a graduate student, and in many cases, obviously, in doing your postdoctoral and advanced career work, is that, communication is key, and it's like any relationship, is having that initial hello and introduction to yourself, and coming equipped, actually, with really realistic, real comments about your interests, and not to be afraid to express those to those individuals. So I wanted to kind of back up a bit and talk about the strategies in which each of us probably would take, or continue to take, to really make those inroads into a mentorship relationship. Jody, would you find it difficult for you, or how did you approach, wanting to be with a particular mentor and really setting up that first line of communication, and what was the strategy?
I think it's really important. I'm a big fan of humility, and also not to be afraid to admit, I don't know. I'm not familiar with all of modern biophysics. Some of the terms are confusing to me. I mean, this is a normal state for a young scientist, and you should not be ashamed of it. Certainly when I'm sitting in the other seat of giving advice to young people, the people who come across the worst are the ones who are trying to overly impress me. There's never such thing as a stupid question, or an ignorant question, because you're exploring. You're at the stage where you're trying to find your pathway in life, and you're going to step into areas where you're not very familiar. So I think don't be afraid to approach even the most prominent professors. I mean, I'm surrounded in my department by Nobel laureates, and they'd be the first people to open their office door and sit down and have a long discussion about what their advice would be on career paths. So don't be afraid of knocking on the door. That said, do a little bit of homework. People who show up at your door and have no idea what you do, and don't know what questions to ask, that's a little bit off-putting. So there is a little bit of homework that should be done. Be a little bit familiar what that professor's research interests are, just so you can kind of see the conversation. But again, don't be ashamed of not knowing. That's what science is. It's a constant pursuit of knowledge, and we're all ignorant. So even the most famous people.
Fantastic. So we have a comment. I want to read it out to the group and then have the panelists respond to. And this message is from Justin. And Justin says, I run a biophysics undergraduate program at PUI. This is the primary undergraduate institution, and I'm always looking for mentors for myself, the program, and for our students. It can be difficult because the field is so vast. Can I get a copy of this webinar so I can share it with my students in the future? So this is a good comment. This is talking about a network and an opportunity to really capture or assist those smaller institutions who may not have those types of resources available. For example, when I was in a program at a research-intensive institution as an undergraduate or a master's student rather, we had a lot of faculty. They were doing research, but there were only one or two immunologists. And so then the selection becomes very narrow for that particular discipline regarding that. So at my point, it would have been very beneficial to have a mentor that was obviously not on the campus and that we could network with. So you raise a very good point. Jody, can you speak to some of the mechanisms that you could use or would use regarding expanding a network? And obviously we will provide this webinar too.
Yes, definitely. So one of the, at least in my experience, I'm also at a predominantly undergraduate institution. And for me, it would be really hard to get access to a big network of different biophysicists. And being in a predominantly undergraduate institution, I am the only biophysics person. So if I need help, I need to look elsewhere, right? But one of the good things about the society is that within the society, there's so many people from all of the different disciplines, from all different kinds of institutions that you can reach out to. When you get a chance to go to the conference, there's tons of different networking events and things like that that you can participate in and make new connections that way. And that way you can at least get a sense of what's being done and what other universities do and what other professors are doing. And at least in my experience, again, I have been with the society since I was an undergrad. So for me, that wasn't necessarily a problem for me to expand my network, because every year that I could go to the society, every year I met new people. I got involved with working with the education committee. So I grew closer to certain people who are in biophysics who care about education. So whenever I have questions and things like this, and I need advice, I can always turn to them and be able to, to expand my network. I know there are other societies that do this as well. It's not just the Biophysical Society, but at least that has been my experience so far.
And Jody?
Yeah, let me address a couple of things. One is, how do you, as a student, find your first network of mentors? And there, the Biophysical Society, as has been mentioned, is a great clearinghouse. I mean, it's a great place to go because everyone's there, but it's an enormous and daunting meeting. And so, one of the things I think was very useful that was touched upon is going to a smaller meeting, a meeting where you can have contact with faculty and really get their insights. I tend to send my students to those kind of meetings as a starting point, because those are the kind of connections that certainly I made when I was a student that last 30 years, because they're intimate connections and they're people that you can then reach out to. So that's point one. Point two, which was the question that was asked of us right now, is a little bit more complicated, which is, I'm at a predominantly undergraduate teaching institution. How do I get the expertise that is often represented at a broad research institution? That's a tougher one, and that I think the society, the Biophysical Society, has a lot of professional outreach programs. So that would be a first place to look for those kind of networks. But again, don't be afraid to reach out to institutions that are nearby. At Stanford, We have close interactions with some of the California state schools. These are heroic institutions that are, teaching a broad swath of our society, often with very pinched resources. And so, we're very happy to open our doors to people from local institutions. And so, I think geographically, looking around you to some of the prominent research institutions, again, just reaching out to people in your field is a good suggestion.
And people are always very willing to help.
People want to help. When I don't help someone, it's just because I'm clueless sometimes and I'm busy and I missed an email. It's not because, I don't want to help this person. You always want to help. And I think that's a general phenomenon you're going to see. And people are intimidated, and you shouldn't be. Reach out. There's a lot of resources around everybody.
Fantastic. So we have another question from Stacy Ann. Stacy Ann is an international graduate student from Florida A&M University, and she states, "I am very confused about how to blend in to my first mentorship program." Now I'm assuming Stacy Ann may be a mentee, and but correct me if I'm wrong, Stacy Ann, but I think this relates to effective communication and actually setting expectations, right? I mean, with any kind of, let's say, dating game or establishing a relationship, you have to know what you want out of the mentoring relationship, and also be aware of that this is a bi-directional street. And so I want Yadi to comment on that, but first I would like to kind of tell a little story of mine, which really I set the tone in terms of what I wanted to do. And as naive as it was, my first impression of my many meetings with prospective mentors was looking at the surroundings of the office space, looking at the surroundings of the laboratory space, taking a mental image of the lab mates within the laboratory, just from face value, seeing if this was a conducive environment for me. One of the labs I was interviewed in, for example, had tons of pictures of artwork and different musical artists, which I found pretty fascinating and wanted to know who those artists were. Another laboratory that I interviewed in for was pretty bland, and I knew right off the bat that wasn't going to be my, venue, even though despite the excellent research I was doing. So I say that only to think about this question in terms of, how do you get through that confusion in terms of getting into a mentorship program? So we'd like the panelists to follow up on that.
Ladies first, as always.
Okay, sure. So I think that setting expectations that are realistic for yourself before you go into this is very important, and figuring out what this person is good at is also very important when you're trying to get a new mentor. One thing that I try to tell my mentees is that your primary professor may not necessarily be the person that's going to be the mentor that you need, because you might have different needs that this person is not going to know as much about. So I would encourage you to find other mentors and not just close yourself to whichever one is within your department or your field. You're going to need mentors in other areas as well. In terms of starting a new mentorship relationship, just like our colleague was saying, you have to do the work too. You have to make sure that when you go to a meeting or when you are approaching a mentor, that you know exactly what you need help with, and that you know some of the background of this person, so that when you have that first interaction, you'll actually be able to have a meaningful interaction, and that it's going to be, worthwhile for both of you. Because like in any relationship, both of the parties involved are going to invest in this and get something out of it as well.
Yeah, let me comment on a couple of because mentorship is a broad term. So, one form of mentorship is you're an undergraduate, you're interested vaguely in applying physical principles to biological systems in some way, but you don't know how to go forward, and you'd like to get some experience in this field. That I would fall under the rubric of trying to choose an undergraduate, a mentor, a first laboratory experience for you to understand what the field is all about. That is really important, and I think that's a really important first step. I mean, my first laboratory experience, I worked in an organic chemistry lab, and I was terrible at it. And I evacuated a building at a university that I then was on the visiting committee of their biophysics program. So, it told me what I didn't want to do, and that was important as well. So, choosing an undergraduate laboratory experience is really important just to see, do you like doing this kind of work? And there, all the rules that hold also for choosing your graduate laboratory hold, which is it's a two-way street. You're trying to find a mentor who you share their vision intellectually, that you want to learn from, who has an approach to science that you find stimulating, but also has a laboratory environment, both in terms of its decor, but also in terms of the people that you can learn from. Because remember, you learn a lot not just from your senior advisors, but also from the people around you and your peers. And so, choosing a laboratory environment, I always say it's like choosing a family. It's what you're going to live in for the next 4 years. Now, and a final point is what we've tried to push here at Stanford, because mentorship is a big issue, is I'm not the Oracle of Delphi. I don't know everything. So it's nice to have a committee, and so we have mentorship committees that are often, can be your thesis committee, cannot be. But just to reiterate the point, get the expertise of multiple people, and usually a committee that's following your thesis is the group of people most familiar with you, and you should assemble a group that has different perspectives on whatever problem you have, and that's a good place to start for diverse mentoring outlooks.
Very good. So I would like to move on to some of the structures centered around the mentoring program, and lead off with asking the question to our panelists. When you were in graduate school, or even undergraduate perhaps, did you have an individual development plan? Did you have a timeline? Did you have any written contract that was associated with your mentorship? And I'm going to raise my hand and say, no, I did not.
Nope, absolutely not.
I was in graduate school in the dark ages. I mean, it was like you showed up on September 1st, and you went into a lab on October 1st, and then you wrote a thesis, and you saw your advisor, a few times, and times have changed a lot, and for the better. I mean, so now, we have IDPs, we have mandated annual meetings, and this is just much better for the students, and truthfully much better for the mentors as well.
So I get a sense that in retrospect we would have loved to have an IDP plan, and then I want to throw out to the panelists is, what do you think now perhaps having a mentee benefits of having the IDP?
What are the benefits are straightforward, right? You're forced every year to have a discussion, a two-way discussion about what your goals are, what have you achieved in the past, and what are you going to attempt to achieve, and what are your career goals, and what can we be doing more to help you achieve those goals. In particular, our graduate population, many of them want to go into academia. There's a certain set of hurdles there that I think we're all very familiar with because we've done it. But then there's this other collection that maybe wants to go into industry or alternative careers, and many times we're less equipped to give wise advice there. And so again, pointing them to the appropriate oracles who can can give them advice about industry careers, about alternative careers, about going into the tech industry with a background in biophysics. These are all things that I think students are hungry for, and the IDP acts as kind of a platform for that.
Jody?
Yeah, and it works really well because they're forced to. And even though that sounds like a bad thing, it's something that as a student you sometimes have to be forced to do these things, because otherwise you don't get a chance to sit down and think about it. Since you'll have to actually meet with your advisor to discuss it, you actually want to put a little bit more effort and actually have it done correctly for you. And that doesn't mean that your plan is not going to change. It might change, but at least you'll be able to talk to your advisor and be able to know more about where to go. That being said, the IDP can be a really great tool, but it can also be a checklist. And you don't want to use your IDP as a checklist. Sometimes there are people who are not as involved with the whole process, and it might be just something that you do to get it out of the way. And obviously this is a personal choice, but I would encourage you to take it seriously and actually think what things you actually want for your future, so that then you can use your resources wisely.
Great. And so next I want to talk about maybe some of the things in terms of actually having that IDP and how do we know what should you expect as a mentee in a relationship. And one of the things I've always drawn upon my students is the deal about what my role is and where I want to get you. And I think the panelists have approached this in many ways already. But one of the things is about fostering independence. And this is a journey you're on. So when you enter as a mentee, undergraduate or graduate student in this relationship, what should you bring to the table? What should you be aware of? And what type of key milestones throughout the relationship should you understand that now it's time for you to take on that independent role? I think many times, whether unconsciously or consciously, and as a mentee, and I'll speak on my behalf, I thought the mentor was knew everything, and that it was, if I do this, this, and this, and listen to the mentor, then it would work out all right. But what I found to learn that the time for holding hand throughout the relationship changes, and it's about fostering that independent experience between your mentee and with your mentor. So, Jody, what do you think in terms of just giving the mentees here an idea on what they should do, or what types of clues should they look into throughout the relationships in terms of reaching certain milestones?
Yeah, well, again, your training as a biophysicist or in any field, again, is a voyage, and most of us start that voyage woefully unequipped to be independent as a scientist. So don't be ashamed that you don't know the techniques, you don't know the data analysis tools, you don't know the mathematical tricks that you should use at the beginning of your voyage. A thing that I always do is I'll sit down with students, and when they start, you have to have clear expectations as a mentor. Remember, a lot of us are not trained to be good mentors, so it's again, the flaws are on both sides of the aisle here. But I look for clear expectations. This is what I think a student should do, and for me, caring and hard work and just being engaged, those are the attributes that I look for initially. But of course, this is going to be like learning how to ride a bicycle. Initially, you're going to have all sorts of training wheels, and you might even be on a tricycle in the beginning. I usually take a graduate student and try to get them working with someone a little bit more senior, so they can understand the methodologies that we use in the laboratory and get some success under their belt. Because really the goal is, by the end of the voyage, that they're independent. They're absolutely independent. And so, what we work on is, having a fairly defined first paper what would that project look like, learning how to write, learning how to write about science, learning how to present science orally. These are all skills that we develop over the course of a thesis, and by the time that someone is finished, I want them to think I'm an idiot and to look at me. I can tell when it's time. They start rolling their eyes when the great wise Jody starts speaking and going, oh God, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Then they're usually ready to graduate, and that's a pretty good criterion. Just in ending, graduate students in my career have always been the people who have done the most groundbreaking work in my laboratory, because they're a little bit naive to get started, but they have that time window, and then they really grow into really taking on very challenging projects, and I love them.
Jody, did you want to comment?
So it's really interesting. So part of, in my experience, there were no such thing as expectations. They were written expectations that you were supposed to know, but they were never told to us. So it was very hard to figure out where you were. So that's where the IDP would have been great. But I learned that I could ask, even though I was not told, right? So I would have my meetings with my advisor, and then I would ask, what is expected of me? What things should I learn in a reasonable amount of time, and that kind of thing. And that's going to be different from student to student, depending on where they're starting, right? But basically, don't be afraid to ask those things if they're not clearly labeled for you. But it's something very organic that happens. One day you come in the lab and you have no idea where anything is, and you have to be working with a senior student, and sometimes you get a great senior student who is a great mentor for you and develop a relationship for your whole life. Sometimes you get somebody who can't wait to leave, so they're not going to be as nurturing to you, but that's something that you have to be prepared for, because you're there to gain a training, and then these are things that you're going to learn. And, eventually you'll see, and you'll experience it for yourself, that then you're going to be like, oh, wait, but my advisor just gave me an advice that makes no sense. Doesn't he know that this paper says blah, blah, blah? And maybe, of course, he might know, but he doesn't remember because he has a lot of other projects that he's also tending to. So you become the expert on your own project, and that happens very naturally. So don't get yourself bogged down to the fact that, oh, I'm not raising to the expectation, I'm not doing this right, but rather make sure that you do progress, slow progress and small progress throughout your time, so that way you can compare yourself to yourself last year. What things have you learned? And that way you can keep yourself in track.
Fantastic. We have another question related to maintaining the relationship. And this statement goes as, I have met many people at conferences, but when we all go back to our lab lives, we are physically separated. Is it okay to reach out via email, or are there better ways to keep in touch, even if you might not need their direct mentorship for quite some time, months to years later? So how do we establish that network? How do we maintain and sustain a productive network? Jody.
Yeah, I'm old-fashioned here, but keeping your personal contacts is important. I think the best way, obviously, you shouldn't be afraid to email someone you met at a conference. I think that, at a minimum, is what you should do. There's lots of modern ways through social media to keep in touch, which I'm not an expert on, but I'm sure that people of the younger generation are. But one way to do it is, you'll meet people that have expertises that go beyond your own, and probably very clearly they may have some expertise that you would like to leverage for your own project. And so one way to keep a network is start a collaboration or ask advice, scientific advice, to somebody who might be an expert on some aspect of what you're doing, That's one way to keep things going, is keep it scientific, keep the flow of information going. Again, students love, I mean, I know that my students love when we get a collaborative project that often happens because someone collided into someone else at a conference, because they get to act as the experts.
Yeah. One of the things that, as an undergrad, I wanted to keep this network. And sometimes when you're younger, you don't realize that there's certain people that you know, their expertise or anything, like you need to keep your network of people that you'll actually get to reach out to, and it's people that you need advice from and stuff like that. Because when you're younger and you want to be this super powerful networking person, you want to have hundreds and hundreds of contacts, and that's not necessarily the way to go. You want to establish good networking connections of people who actually know about you and know what you're doing. And one of the best ways to do this is by an email. I had contact with this professor who I had done research with, and even though I did research with him many years ago, I would once a year I would send him an email if I saw one of his papers published, or I had a question of something that reminded me of him because he had the expertise for. So I will just send him a nice short email. Hey, I came across to your new paper. Congratulations. I think it's very interesting. I would ask him some questions and stuff like that. And even though it was an email once a year, he still remembers me and we still talk. And if we see each other at the conference, we can go grab coffee, whatever. But just try to make those connections, meaningful connections, and, you know, of people that you actually get to know over time.
And I just want to respond also. I think one of the ways to really establish and sustain effective relationships around mentoring is really understanding the reality of the number of and quality and what your needs are from each person you meet, each scientist you meet. Not all of them may qualify as that mentor, but many of them will qualify as expert coaches or content mentors, if you will, that you get a little bit out of from that person, not necessarily the full-blown mentoring relationship, but some of them blossom into getting you in touch with another content expert in your area of biophysics that may lead to a collaboration. What I like about it, and I think what all of us can speak to as mentors, is that we are a collective society that really love to help one another. And so if we can't find that advice, we try to find another person. And many times it's that other person or the contact with the next person that really becomes perhaps your mentor. And so, yes, it's important to network and how you communicate. There's always good mechanisms such as emails and being periodically in contact, but in contact based on what your real need will be. Is it content? Is it looking for job opportunities in the field? Are they really going, how much time is it going to take that to foster that need? And many times it's not as long as what you would expect for a full mentoring experience. But those mentoring experiences do long-term also fall from those different branches that you establish in your network that are specialized. Yeah. I think we have another question here. And the question is, how do you navigate when your direct advisor mentors aren't as open to the career pursuits you have in mind? So we all want to create us, create copies of us. So what solutions are there out there for us? Jody.
You know, as I was saying, this is a very common occurrence and something that we've tried to aggressively address, certainly in our graduate programs at Stanford, which is, you know, not everyone wants to become a professor, and that's not the point of our education in biophysics or any field. Our goal is to create deep thinking, independent-minded, independent scientists, right, and give them the intellectual tools to solve complex problems. Now, those tools can be used to be in academia, which is a wonderful career, full of its ups and downs like anything, but something I wouldn't trade for anything, mainly because I have no practical skills that would be useful to anybody who pays salaries. But that joking aside, many of the students want to go into other fields, and I'm thrilled about that. But does that mean that I'm qualified to give them advice about what those fields might be? Many times, no. So what my approach is try to find people in my network, and the older you are, the kind of broader your networks are, who might be an expert. If someone wants to go work at a hedge fund or something strange that I don't know anything about, you get the experts to talk to them. So one way is to have that dialogue with your professor and get names or advice of people that they should be talking to. If that's not working, go again to the other members of your mentoring committee that you should have available and ask them the same question. Someone will help you and get you pointed in the right direction. And again, there's no shame in thinking about an alternative career. All careers are valid, and I've had students do many things, and I'm as proud of the ones that are professors as those that teach high school. They're all great paths forward, and that part of it is you figuring out what that path is.
And always just making sure that if your immediate mentor that you're talking to is not as open, just find somebody else from your mentors who would be willing to help. There are many people who within their networks they know people from all different places, and at least for my students, I always tell them to think about what they want to be, and then we do different things. Like many of the students here wanted to go into biotech, so we actually went and we visited a biotech company, and they talked to the employees there, and then they got a better idea of what that was like. But that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't because the students told us that that was something they wanted to do. I've never been in the biotech industry, but I have plenty of friends who are in the biotech industry here, and they're local, so it wasn't hard for us to schedule a trip and have them be seeing what it's like for a day in this person's job or something like that. So as long as you find somebody within your mentors who's willing to listen, you will be okay, and they'll be able to help you find those people who are experts in something that may not necessarily be academia.
Yeah, and I think also you learn about your prospective mentors' nuances and indications of what they perceive you to be in your future, by also, again, returning to that environment, learning a little bit about what the co-workers in the laboratories have thought about. Speak to them in addition or prior to or at some point before making a decision by entering a mentor's lab. In most cases that works because I think students nowadays are very keen on a lot of the different opportunities out there besides being in academia. Mm-hmm. But again, you should also understand your own conviction and what you want to do, even in the middle of a program where, you are at full bore in terms of being a basic science researcher in biophysics in the inter-university setting, and all of a sudden things change. Quality of life changes. That must fit your whole needs. And this talks about the holistic approach to the person that you want to be in a laboratory. Beyond the scientist, you still have the other life balance to deal with, and those should all be a part of the equation, and be willing to address those situations with your mentor. And that's a good mentor, to be able to listen to those needs that you have throughout the journey, if you will, of your program. So very good question. We have about, 10 or so, 15 minutes left, so I want to move into another section. Really, this talks about NRMN and what NRMN does, and how can mentees and mentors take advantage of this NRMN. And so one of the prompts talk about how can NRMN help mentees locate a mentor with specific knowledge regarding biophysics and careers in the field. And so I think one of the advantages of the National Research Mentoring Network is actually providing a network. And it's been very productive in actually engaging with societies like the Biophysics societies, where they're, as you know, as large as a society it is, and when you go to the national meeting like this one just recently, there was opportunities for NRMN to meet with all the investigators there, with all the students there, and to recruit them into the network. Structurally, how does that work? It works. You have the opportunity, like you are in this webinar, to join NRMN, which I assume everyone on this webinar has, and then they have time to participate in the portal. And within this portal is a whole database, a collection of mentors that will enter information about their societies they belong to, their disciplines they're a part of, and their interests. And you, as a NRMNT, have the opportunity to search those potential mentors all across the country and to establish what we've been talking about, that engagement in that relationship. So in a big scheme, that is how it's done. I would like to give the panelists an opportunity to talk about their experience with NRMN and if they had any experience around mentoring.
So in my experience with the NRMN, I'm still in the mentee side. And I've had the opportunity to talk to other more senior professors about how is it to start your own lab, what are the little things that you should pay attention to when trying to get promotion eventually, and all those kind of things. And I think that through this network, one of the things that's nice is that they give you these questions that are kind of like a little prompt, so that both of you can start a conversation if it's something that within a certain amount of time you haven't had the time to actually set aside and start talking to this person. And I think it's really cool. Again, it requires both the mentor and the mentee to actually find time when they can talk, which sometimes can be very challenging. But yeah, it's a good way of establishing relationships with people that otherwise you might never even meet, because they might be in a different part of the country and they might not belong to your society, and they may be in a completely different path than you are. But it gives you the opportunity to reach these people and get other advice and other perspectives that you may not necessarily get from people around you.
Jody.
Yeah, I guess I haven't had an experience with the network, but it's a fantastic resource. Again, these are the kind of things that didn't exist, 20 years ago. Certainly, 30 years ago when I was getting started. Boy, I wish they did. It would have helped me avoid a lot of mistakes that I've made, and the kind of courses that I've helped to try to put together around mentoring are all kind of based on my own experiences of missteps, so that make sure that younger people don't make those missteps. So, take advantage of all these resources. I think it's really an important statement to make that you're never done being mentored. Mm-hmm. You need mentoring when you are in high school choosing colleges. You need mentoring when you're trying to navigate going from classwork to a discipline as an undergraduate. You need mentoring to choose graduate programs appropriately, not just based on reputation or marquee name, but on what the programs really mean. You need mentoring to choose a research laboratory. If you choose to go to graduate school, you need mentoring throughout the PhD program, and you need mentoring when you choose what you do after the PhD program. And I still need mentoring as a full professor. There's still things that I need to learn and advice that I need. And certainly, getting started as a junior faculty member or as a newly minted biotech worker or somebody working in a consulting firm, All those things require mentoring. So, you know, again, my only advice is use the tools that have been provided, because everyone realizes that mentoring was so important, but it was so ignored for so long in a formal way. Use those tools and leverage them as best you can. People are always willing to help. They're always willing to help.
Thank you. And I also want to add to that, you know, NRM has this great opportunity where you as mentees can actually form your own communities within the NRM network. And this provides actually a similar venue in what we're sharing with you today. And I want to touch upon really a peer-peer, near-peer mentoring. And so, in a sense, what we're talking about here is about distance in terms of those with experience far more than you have as a student are providing valuable advice in terms of your journey. But there's also opportunities where, of course, postdocs, and you're a graduate student, or graduate students in which you're an undergraduate students, they serve as mentors too, and they have opportunity to shed some valuable light on to you as well. And so when thinking about where to receive advice from, where to receive mentoring from, they may be right next door to you. And you're as a graduate student or as a postdoc, even more so than maybe what you would appear to be as your major mentor as a faculty member or full professor. So this MindRMN allows you to do that, and I encourage you to take advantage of all those relationships, regardless of the distance in terms of what traditionally has been known as a mentor versus a mentee relationship.
Absolutely. Use the resources around you. Everyone, and you got to integrate the advice, you know, that you're getting from your peers, from people a little bit more senior than you. Everyone has a different perspective, and it's just useful to hear it. My perspective is distinct from those that are assistant professors, that's distinct from those who are postdocs and graduate students. So yes, this is excellent advice.
So I see that we don't have any more questions on the sidebar. I'll give the group about 10 seconds to quickly type a response in case we want to continue. I think we're pretty wrapped up here, but on behalf of the panelists, I want to thank them, thank Yadi, and thank Jody for taking time out. Thank NRM for hosting this, and I hope all of you who are in attendance, we gave you some valuable information. And before I sign off, I'll let Yadi and Jody say a closing words, and then we'll turn it over to Alexis.
Well, just like Jody was saying, use your resources. They're there for you. And don't be afraid to ask for help, because everyone is more willing to help than you think.
Yes, we've all struggled. We've all needed help. Even the most famous scientists that you see in the world have had their ups and downs and needed a good mentor to give them guidance. So don't be afraid to ask for help. You know, we all need it. So, and everyone's willing to help you.
Yeah. Well, good luck to everyone. Thank you for signing in. I believe it is actually recorded. And so for those who want to share this information with everyone, I'm sure it'll be available on the NRM portal. So let me see if our moderator is here. Alexis, are you here?
Yes, hello everyone. Just want to